You, yes, you, listener. Did you know that everybody at History Hack works for free? And as much fun as that is, it would be great if we could garner just a little bit of support for all of the time and effort that goes into producing the show. I have a cat that needs food. Zach has Airfix models to buy. And Boney likes books. So if you can chuck us a couple of quid as a one-off via Ko-fi or subscribe to Patreon, we would much appreciate it. Thank you. Hello and welcome to today's History Hack. I have Mr. Chris Sams with me today. Hello, Chris.
Hi, mate. How are you doing?
There'd only be one reason why you'd be hanging around, isn't there?
Boats.
Yeah.
Or chicken. Probably boats.
Boats or fried chicken. Yeah. Tell us what it is. Boats, not fried chicken. Tell us who's here and why you're excited.
Okay, so today we've got Graham Thomas, who is a naval maritime historian who specialises in the Royal Navy in the 18th century, especially to do with pirate hunting and piracy. And he has a new book out called The Pirate Killers, which looks really good.
Does indeed. Actually, you stole it from me yesterday. You ran away with my copy because you wanted it that much. Yeah, he's waving it around now. It's in my backpack when I left my house, and when I got home late last night, it was not. So, welcome, Graham.
Thank you.
This is really good because your book is kind of focused on Barbary pirates and the African coasts, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
That's going to be really good. So one thing Chris jumped on straight away when he was reading this yesterday is that in the 17th century, you mentioned that the Barbary states are sailing further and further afield and come up as far as the Channel and conduct slaving raids. They're making off with white Europeans, aren't they?
Yes, they would land parties on the coast of Cornwall and basically go into a village, grab people, take them out, and get back to their boats before anybody could do anything about it.
So in general, how much of a real menace are the Barbary pirates to British and European shipping?
They were, I would say the best way to look at it would be the way that the pirates are now for shipping around Somalia and that kind of thing. It's that kind of a menace. Like as we have today, we've got the shipping, all the shipping going through the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, and the Somali pirates that have been operating there, that have been that have basically forced the Europeans to send warships into those areas in order to protect the tankers. It's the same kind of thing, probably not on as big a scale, because you've got to understand these raids it wasn't every day. It would have been months, maybe years between them. So because they didn't have the technology, they were having to cover massive distances, and the only thing they had was sail power. So it would be months before they would be able to conduct another raid. So for the people at the time, it was a problem for sure.
Sort of more of a nuisance rather than on the same scale as like the Viking threat, which I know is a bit of an odd parallel, but it's just something that happens every so often and just annoys them, and they're not to do a proper sweep and clear of them.
They were, I would say, terrorists. That's the best way to look at it. So it was brutal when it happened. But they weren't, as you say, they weren't a threat of invasion. They were basically just trying to grab people. All they cared about was cash, trading, making money, and grabbing whatever they could. But they were basically terrorists. And I think that's probably the best way to look at it.
Later on, you in your book, you talk about Madagascar as a base for pirates, like Avery, Chew, and Bullridge. Why did it make such an ideal base for pirates operating off the east coast of Africa?
The first thing you need to understand is that there was already a settlement in Madagascar. There was a British a trading post there. There were actually several trading posts there. So there was already a settlement, and most of the pirates knew about the convoys from the Indian Ocean into by the Arabian states up to Mecca, which happened every year, and it was taking all these riches. So it was just about anybody who was a pirate, even in England and Europe, would know, and also in the Americas, because the Americas, a lot of American merchants actually financed some of the Madagascar pirates. So loads and loads of people, most people that were involved in commerce knew about the trade routes. So a lot of pirates, it was as the Royal Navy was expanding outwards and attacking pirates in America and all around the Caribbean, it was getting hotter and hotter for pirates to operate in that area because the Royal Navy was pushing in, the French were in there, the Spanish were in there, all trying to get attack pirates. Africa and and Madagascar in particular became a very, very interesting place. It was perfectly located to attack shipping in the Indian Ocean. It was perfectly located to go after for pirates to quickly intercept the Arabian convoys and grab their gold and all their stuff that they were carrying, all the riches and the wealth and gold and silver and the silks and the linens and all of that sort of stuff that they wanted. And they would grab them, and sometimes they would even take their ships completely. So that was why Madagascar was a big, shall we say, a big place, and it just grew and grew.
I suppose it's remote enough that it's not going to draw attention, and as you said, with the official navies on the other side of the Atlantic looking for them, it's remote enough but close enough to still attack sea lanes quite effectively and still get what you need for raiding, like food supplies and ammunition.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And it only changed because it affected the European trade routes. So when the Europeans were affected and were unable to get the Arabian materials that they wanted, that's when the French and the Royal Navy were sent to deal with it.
This is hilarious because this is typically European, isn't it? When it becomes an issue for them, the Royal Navy are not going to stand for these pirates even sailing up to Cornwall and enslaving people. But it's a big mission, isn't it? There's many miles of open ocean. So how does the Royal Navy address this and other issues to solve the problem of the Barbary pirates?
They essentially use privateers.
Okay.
So a lot of the privateers would be commissioned out of places like Bristol, Cornwall, and those areas. And most of them were ex-pirates who would have been, for whatever reason, decided to turn good. Maybe they hadn't been that successful as pirates, but they would get a commission from the English crown. They'd have letters of marque, which gave them the authority to do it, and then they would go and get and attack the pirates. And quite often, even as they were privateers, quite often they would take the pirate booty for themselves, and they would destroy them, the pirates that they were hunting. Sometimes they would turn back to pirates, but it was a combination of privateers and the Royal Navy itself.
I suppose it means that you don't have to, obviously through the 18th century with Britain being involved in several wars, it meant that you didn't have to take your warships off the line to go and deal with the pirates if you could pay poachers turned gamekeepers to go and deal with it for you.
Mm-hmm. Now, Captain Kidd is a perfect example. He was not a pirate, he was a privateer. And he attacked ships and got booty, etc., etc. Even though he was put on trial as a pirate, he wasn't. He was a privateer. He had letters of marque from the crown. So, and there was a lot of people like him, a lot of, you have to understand, a lot of the privateers were already merchants. So, you know, in those days, there were no cars, there were none of the technology that we have. The big technology was ships. So everything, all the commerce was done via sea. So all the stuff that's coming into, all the merchandise coming into Britain, it's all coming in by sea. And so just about everybody and his brother was who was a merchant would have had a fleet of ships, small ships, but they would have been, you know, they could have fitted them out. If they became privateers, they would have fitted them out with guns and stuff like that, and that they would do that. So they were, you know, their ships were around in their hundreds, if not thousands.
Talks about people that went looking for them. Let's talk a bit about some of the pirates as well. One that springs to mind as being particularly famous is Black Bart. So Bartholomew Roberts. Can you tell us a bit about him?
Well, he was an Englishman. He became a pirate quite early on in his career. I think he was originally on the same ship as Avery was.
So what kind of activity did he take part in? How problematic are these men?
Oh, he sank, he attacked or sank or captured something in the neighborhood of 400 ships.
Wow.
Most of them were merchant ships. He attacked slave ships, and he would generally kill the crew, or he would enslave the crew. He would bring the slaves onto his ships to get them to work as crew, because he had a fleet of ships. So you know, it wasn't just one ship. He actually had a fleet of ships that was under his command at the highest point of his career. He had a small fleet of ships, and he would change ships. So he would attack. His fleet would attack, say, a large merchant ship that might have 70 guns, whereas his ships might have like 40 guns, and he would attack those ships, take the big ship for himself, and hand out all the goods and everything to the rest of the ships in his fleet. So he was almost like a navy unto himself. So for him, he in particular was a menace, a major menace.
They sort of pirates like Black Bart and Captain Kidd sort of take on this sort of mantle of almost infamous celebrity. When they do finally get caught, and they usually do, and they end up being executed or killed in battle, what kind of impact does that have on overall merchant trade and for the Royal Navy? Does it make their life easier?
Well, one of the things it did for the Royal Navy was to give it the gravitas that many other navies did not have, because the Royal Navy took down Black Bart and took down Blackbeard as well. Both of those, they were probably around the time the top two most infamous pirates, and the Royal Navy took those guys down. So it gave them a huge amount of gravitas, and probably led to the Royal Navy having a greater degree of control of the seas, because all the pirates would say, well, we don't want to tangle with the Royal Navy, because they've taken out some of our most notorious pirates. So it did that for the Royal Navy. And I think in terms of what it did for trade, Black Bart was, he was getting rid of him, killing him in battle, defeating him in battle, and then defeating the rest of his fleet in battle. And of course, they all pretty much dispersed. So the trade, that was a really good thing, because it gave greater confidence in the trade, the fact that the sea routes were now relatively free, obviously until the next pirate came along. But after Black Bart died, there wasn't really anybody of any like him that came along to challenge the sea routes or to challenge the Royal Navy.
How do they take him down?
Oh, in battle.
Mm.
It's the HMS Swallow, I believe it is the one that ultimately defeats him, and they do it with more than one ship. I think it's 2 or 3 ships they use that take him down and blast him. They don't pretty much blast him out of the water, but they do. He does die in the major sea battle.
Moving on from talk about hubs of piracy, Algiers appears started to become a real problem in the Mediterranean, to the point that the British and the Dutch were resolved to go and stamp it out and clean out all the pirates. Had all the sort of piracy and trade interdiction been a major distraction for them during the Napoleonic Wars?
Yeah, because the problem that they had was the piracy taking place coming out of Algiers during the Napoleonic Wars was forcing the Royal Navy to divert ships from the front line, to divert ships away into Algiers. And because Algiers was on the side of Napoleon to some degree, would support Napoleon, and certainly not England for a variety of reasons. The Royal Navy had to deal with them, as did the Dutch. Whether or not what they did was successful, that's a different. That's hard to say. When they attacked Algiers and bombarded it, it's difficult. The piracy didn't stop in Algeria until the French invaded it and possessed it. And so the French and the British for over, well, probably decades, centuries have been trying to stop it. But they never took that one step to do what the French did, which was to attack, occupy, and then destroy the pirates and hunt them down. They never did that. They only ever sent fleets. They never actually did any kind of land campaign that the French did.
The Battle of Algiers is quite intense, isn't it? With the fleet firing 50,000 round shot, 118 tons of gunpowder, bomb vessels had fired 960 explosive mortar shells. How significant is the outcome of this battle?
Well, it's like I said, is that they flattened the place completely. Yeah. They killed loads and loads of people. But the thing was rebuilt. The city was rebuilt very quickly. The piracy was back up and running again. Not too long after that. And it was, like I said earlier, it was only when the French invaded and occupied it that the piracy completely stopped. So my feeling is that the Battle of Algiers paved way for the weakened Algiers enough so that it paved the way for the French to invade it. That's what I think. Although I didn't find in the research that I can recall that anything that says that, but I would suggest that that's probably that had some kind of an outcome on the French decision to invade.
So it'd be fair to say that the British didn't go quite the final step.
No, they didn't. No,
and if they had, it would have.
It's very much like what Britain does today. We'll go in and, we might send troops into a particular place, but we won't take that next step, which means going to war. So that's the one thing that we don't do. And that's the same thing back then. They did not declare war on Algiers. Had they done so, that would have meant a land campaign, and they didn't want to get involved in a land campaign. So they used the Royal Navy to bombard Algiers. And I suppose the piracy level dropped for sure. And then once the French invaded, it was gone because they hunted down the pirates.
So who were? Would you be able to tell us who the reefy pirates were? Because they started to take on quite an interesting mantle on the coast of West Africa.
They were primarily Moroccan, and primarily from the coastal areas of Morocco. And there's that reef, which is what the coastal area of Morocco is called, or was called at the time. And that's where they came from, in the mountainous areas on the coastline, primarily from Morocco, but also further afield into Tangiers, Tangier, whatever, at that particular point. But their primary focus was that the coast of Morocco. And they had villages and they lived in the mountain. And the reason why it's so difficult to get to them is because they lived and operated in the mountains. So if you did a land campaign to get to them, it would be hugely costly in terms of material and in terms of personnel, because they could hide in the caves and the cliffs and all that sort of stuff. And they even hid their boats inside caves that were at sea level or just above. They would hide their boats in there, so that you could not really attack them and be successful in getting rid of them unless you wanted to land troops, and that's the Royal Navy didn't do that.
They did try to almost use diplomacy with them, but they found that they couldn't trust them.
Yeah,
they kept breaking their word.
You know, they broke their word. They were typical pirates, and they broke their word all the time. They were untrustworthy, and they just kept on attacking shipping. So in the long run, the Royal Navy, they were trying to deal with these people for years, and it took a long time before that area ended. Before that, they died out. Who are operating now, from what I've heard.
In terms of how they operate, do they differ to Black Bart and pirates on the other side of the continent?
Yeah, they didn't get into fleets. They didn't use massive ships with cannon on it. They didn't fight in the conventional way. They fought in smaller boats. With that were fast. They would have a whole crew that would row these things really quickly, and they used small arms like rifles, muskets, that sort of thing. And they would attack boats, and they would board them and then take what they wanted and leave. And it was all done at very fast. I mean, it's very similar to the Somali pirates today that use small boats, light weapons, boats that are fast, and they can get to their targets quickly, attack them, take what they want, and then leave. And that's essentially how they did it. They did not use huge, massive, great ships like Black Bart did. And they operated in kind of a loose formation of fleets, small boats, maybe one or two or three. They would operate, they would see their prey, and they would move their boats around as quickly as they could. But they weren't like huge men of war.
Which ultimately makes it a lot harder for the British to catch them.
Yeah, much harder.
So, but by the mid 19th century, the Royal Navy are starting to use steam-powered paddle ships as well as the usual traditional sail vessels. Did this have an impact on pirate hunting at all?
Well, it did, because with the steamships came bigger guns, more, not just cannon, but now they had bigger caliber guns. They had recoiling guns. They could direct their fire much better, and they weren't just sending cannonballs in. Now they had actual shells that when they hit would explode. So yes, it did. They were able to, for example, take the Prometheus onto the reef coast where there was a load of pirates, and they were able to blast for hours. They just blasted these guys, blew up their huts, blew up boats. Actually, managed to get shells into some of the caves where they were hiding. So with the advent of that kind of technology, it increased their success.
In terms of how they take on pirates as well, by the mid-19th century, the Royal Navy are using steam-powered paddle ships as well as more traditional vessels. What kind of impact do these have?
Well, they were the steamships were able to get there faster. They were able to the paddle ships particularly were able to didn't have a draft, so they were able to get in close, fire, and then pull out. But of course, that was provided that the steam was working. Yeah, I think they had an effect, more so than sail. They were able to do more with steam than they had been able to do with sail, and I think they were faster as well. So they could get in quickly, fire, and then get out. They had to, but again, they didn't land troops. They didn't get into a land campaign because that would have meant declaring war on Morocco, which they didn't want to do.
Yeah, so I suppose you need to get the sovereign states' approval to actually do anything about it. They had the same problem with the Germans in Brazil in 1914. So the Navy are just trying to come up with a naval solution.
Yeah. Well, they finally did manage to, through diplomacy, through military means, they did manage to finally get the Pasha of Morocco to use his troops to take on the Rif pirates. But it took years for that to take place. And I think the continuous success of the Royal Navy, especially with the steamships and that coming in and really being able to blast the coastline, and threats also from England, basically saying, well, if you don't do something about it, we'll ratchet it up a bit more. Maybe there was a threat of war behind it within the diplomacy. But I think there was a combination of new technology, diplomacy, and a threat of maybe sanctions, maybe the threat of war, with Britain having new technology in steam, new guns, new caliber guns, that sort of stuff. I think that's what forced the Pasha or the Sultan to actually start attacking the pirates, and that's what ultimately stopped the Reef pirates, is that they were attacked internally by Moroccan forces.
They are, you say they were defeated, but there are still issues with pirates and piracy along these coastlines and that. So what lessons do you think we can learn from pirate hunting across this period that can be applied against modern pirates in the region?
Well, I think the one thing is, you don't use a land campaign. Don't do it, because you'll get involved in all sorts of problems, and you'll get involved in the local culture. And I think the key lessons are, find out what the cause is of the piracy, and if it's a failed state, then we either decide that we're going to go in and try and fix that state with the help, but not go piling in like we do, but just provide aid to that state, help to sustain them, help to ensure that their people have food, that and that the causes of piracy are taken away, and making sure that people in the region have got have got some form of livelihood, which doesn't mean which doesn't affect the trade. I think that's a key lesson. I think the other lesson would be that everybody has to do more in order to stop the trade. But it all goes into what are the causes of piracy, and when you understand what the causes of piracy are they just criminals? In many ways, the piracy of people like Black Bart, they were criminals. But if you've got people like the Riff Pirates who are operating from their own territory, like the Somali pirates today, they're operating from their own territory. They're part of, it's their own culture. Then you've got to look into that the culture, the territory that they're operating from, and say, why are they going after piracy? Are they just criminals? If they're just criminals, then you take them out. But there's probably a lot more to it. They could be terrorists today. They might be terrorists, not just pirates, but terrorists. So, I think finding out what they want, finding out what the causes are, and then getting together with the European nations to try to fight it, and to use diplomacy, and to use to go in and try and help them and support them, not take over, but just go in and try and support them, is probably the way forward.
Rather than an increased international naval presence.
Yeah. I think you got to keep the naval presence there because it's the threat, and it's the naval presence is there. But if they're being supported by another nation like Iran, who would be supporting them, and other nations, organizations that will be supporting them, again, you have to find out what those nations, who they are, and go to them and say, look, what are you doing? Why are you supporting these people? And if you're supporting it just to piss us off, then we're going to hammer you.
Yeah.
I think that's, so there's that all those different prongs, if you will, different avenues. You got to do diplomacy. You got to look at the causes. You got to see what you can do to, I guess, alleviate the suffering, try and help them out, give them supplies, and also try to get them, if they can't grow their own food for whatever reason, try and help them to get arable land, to what to do with their arable land, how to irrigate it properly. If they've got drought, then find ways of getting, maybe build a desalination plant, or help them to build a desalination plant that gets water into their areas. There's all of that sort of thing. And then on top of that, if these guys are just, you do all of that and it still continues and they're still being behaving like terrorists, then you find out if someone's supporting them, a belligerent country like Iran, if they're supporting them, then you gotta go to the belligerent countries and say, look, if you keep doing this, we're going to have to do something.
Graham, thank you so much for coming on to give us an overview of your book, Pirate Killers. It is available on the History Hack bookshop. It's brilliant. What I saw of it before Chris stole it from me and went running for the hills back to Medway with it in his backpack was wonderful.
Like a pirate.
Yeah. I've never seen you move so fast, but you're loving it. And that is a ringing endorsement from someone who is so discerning with his boaty content. So Graham, thank you very much.
When our guests join us to talk about their work and their new book, the 45 minutes or so they spend with us is just a taster of all their efforts. So to this end, we have launched our very own bookshop on bookshop.org, where you can find our guests' latest and greatest books. You can support them, and you can support History Hack too. 10% of every sale via our bookshop supports the podcast and allows us to keep at it and bring you more amazing guests. You can find our bookshop at bookshop.org/shop/history hack, or just search on bookshop.org for us under the shops bit. Thank you for your continued support, and here's to your next great book.